Thanks for joining me today, Jason. I'm sure the people are excited to hear what you have to say about your work so far in the game
Very
industry.
cool.
So, I say let's just go ahead and get started.
Hit me.
All right. Well, which game was your favorite to work on?
Of all games ever. I mean, in a way, it's sort of like asking you to choose your favorite kid. However, in the same way, every game has its own sort of special thing. But I think if I were to pick the most enjoyable game, kind of start to finish, it would probably be Moss Book 2. And that's for two reasons. Moss is this VR game that was amazing and came out about 3 years ago. A sequel came out last year. And number one, the reason I say that is because it was a sequel, and it's always a lot more enjoyable when I get to do a sequel to my own work, because kind of a lot of the groundwork's been laid already, right? And it's less work getting everything up and running and more like, great, let's pick up where we left off. So that makes it fun. Which also, Dead Space 2 would be another one that I would add to because it was a sequel and all the hard work had been done. But if you listen to Dead Space 2 and you listen to Moss 2, in terms of creating the music, Moss 2 is very, harmonically lush and melodic and singable, and it's foresty, Celtic kinds of fantasy vibes, which is just a pleasure. Like, it's relaxing to work on and a lot of fun. At the end of the day, it's just like, oh, what a great day. When I'm working on Dead Space, it's like, okay, whew, day finished. Let's go have a glass of wine. You need to unwind a little bit more, but those two really are kind of neck and neck.
Is there a difference in the process between working on a new game versus working on a remake?
It's definitely different. The initial process, depending on the game, of course, for my brain, is what instruments do I want to use? More importantly, what instruments do I not want to use that's going to make this particular game, even if it's the 16th horror game that I've scored, what's going to make this horror game different from all the other horror games that I've done? That also, those instrument choices are relatable to the game itself. So it's kind of two things in one. So when you talk about a sequel, that work's already been done. And of course, I don't want to say, like for Dead Space 2, okay, I'm just going to do the same thing I did for Dead Space 1, because I'm always kind of like a musical great white shark. I got to keep moving forward and trying something different and trying something new. In the case of Dead Space 2, what worked with the game was to get a string quartet in to play actual music with real notes and chord progressions and a theme, and then also do some scary stuff. But that way I could contrast the string quartet to the giant orchestra. That was sort of my new thing for Dead Space 2 that made it different and unique compared to Dead Space 1. If it's a sequel like Tomb Raider, for example, which I had not worked on any Tomb Raiders before, I was kind of let off the hook by Crystal Dynamics because they didn't want necessarily any sort of musical homage or anything paid to the original Tomb Raider scores. It was more like, this is a new Tomb Raider, this is a new theme, new instrumentation, you just do whatever you want to do. So in a way, even though that was a sequel, I was kind of starting from the beginning, building it again from the ground up. It's like everything's a challenge, and it's really a matter of embracing like the pain of the challenge, the creative pain in a good way, and trying to find that interesting connection of what I think would be cool versus what will work for the game, and also what is really inspiring musically. Maybe it's a certain musician to work with, maybe it's a certain instrument that I've bought and haven't been able to play or record in a while. Maybe it's a new piece of software that I wanted to learn and it'll be perfect for this one project. Yeah, it's completely different every single time, which is terrifying, but also, I wouldn't have it any other way.
You've been working with supermassive games on the Dark Pictures Anthology. Do you plan to go into Season 2 with them?
I think so. At least I think that I can say that I am. Because I've been working with them since before the Dark Pictures, starting with Until Dawn, and then a VR game they did, Rush of Blood. It's been over 10 years now. And the main reason for that I think, is a combination of a good working relationship with the team, but more importantly, a really great relationship with the audio director, Barney Pratt. And this is really, I've been doing games for probably more than 20 years now, and this is the only game developer that has had the same audio director for 10 years going. Usually after a game or two, they skip out because they're moving, because they're trying to get into a different genre, they get a job that maybe is more appealing to them because they've done horror for 5 years or something, and Barney has stuck it out doing horror, which I think is the hardest thing to do full-time from an audio perspective. He's been doing it for 11 years now. That's the main reason that I'm still there with those guys, because Barney keeps asking me back, and I really, really appreciate it.
And what would you say is your favorite genre to work in?
Whatever genre I haven't been working on for the past 6 months. Yeah, once I get off, let's say like a Dark Pictures gig, I've probably had a couple of other things working as well. You know, one day on Dark Pictures, one day on Moss Book 2, another day on a different game. But once those games wrap up, there's sort of this creative sense of enthusiasm and relief at the same time. It's like, yes, another milestone, like we made it, we got everything out the door. We get the soundtrack finished, and I don't really want to listen to or have to write more of that project style again, because I've sort of done everything I could for it, and I need a bit of a break. And honestly, I have had to do overlapping horror games before, but they were so different that I didn't feel like I was still having to do the same thing, because it was different instruments and a different developer and a different story and different characters, even if it was scary.
If you had to pick one piece of work that you're most proud of and consider a personal achievement, which one would it be?
Gosh, I'd have to say it would, I mean, my gut instinct, which I'm told is what you're supposed to go with, it would be those same two games, Dead Space 2 and Moss Book 2, but for completely different reasons. Dead Space 2, my feet were sort of out of the fire. Dead Space, the original one, including the music that they brought back for the remake that came out last month. That was just 2 years of me trying to convince myself that what I was doing was going to work and hoping that it would, but being fearful the entire time that it wouldn't. And at some point in time, EA would just say, you know what, we're just gonna get somebody else. You have no clue what you're doing. Which is a very typical feeling, I think, for a lot of creative people, but more so with the first Dead Space. So when the second one came around, I had more or less gotten those feelings out of my system, and it was more like, okay, cool, well, what can we do to like just make it really even better? And I did some themes that I was really having fun manipulating. The main theme for Dead Space 2 is DEAD, with a couple of accidentals in there. I really enjoyed that, and then it was sort of counterbalanced with a necromorph theme that was just 4 notes that chromatically went down, and a lot of times I'd play them at the same time. So you get this bum, 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 and above that is going bum, 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 and I'd play them together and turn them around and just do lots of fun musical things. It's like I had established the playground, just like we said, and I was able to play in it more freely. And very much the same way with Moss Book 2. But less about the instruments in the playground and more about the harmonies and the melodies. Dead Space 2, rhythm, yes, very rhythmic and very textural and really scary and kind of stressful to compose. Moss Book 2, everything I said before, just incredibly, it was like a gift. Every day I had to work on it. And I would just stop in the middle of the day and just think, I can't believe I'm getting paid to write music like this, because it's just this beautiful, relaxing, even the combat music's fun, and it's more like a dance kind of a thing. And it's all live musicians. We all recorded ourselves at home. I got to play so many instruments that I normally don't get to play in one game. Lots of my drums and percussion and electric guitars and electric basses and a ukulele and even some string textures and some amazing live musicians, soloists to record things. It was just, yeah, those two, for sure. Sorry, same answer, but for slightly different reasons.
Well, I guess you could say that you're a man of sequels then.
Apparently so.
If you could go back and pick any project to be a part of, which game would you have wanted to do the music for?
That's a good one. Boy, this is gonna come off as like pop culture-y, but it has nothing to do with the current pop culture. Either Uncharted or The Last of Us. Basically something by Naughty Dog. Because either one of those titles, I think, were just so well done. And I know both composers, and they're both amazing human beings, and the scores they wrote were incredible. But what fertile ground for music composition. I think there's something about Naughty Dog and the way that they script their games. They're just so well written. It's almost like they're written like a film or TV show. Go figure. Now there's a TV show, right? I think that there's a natural narrative and kind of a cinematic draw to the big games that really pull people in and make them want to experience it again and again and again. And having that kind of storyline is just an amazing playground for music as well. And I feel like Naughty Dog really does music the right way. You know, they embrace it and they see it as an opportunity to elevate the story and elevate the gameplay, and not just like, oh, well, let's score some cinematics and then we'll do some music here. I mean, it's integrated. It's like an integral part of the story. And I really appreciate that.
One last question for you, Jason. I see you studied under a number of film composers when you were earning your degree at the University of Southern California. What led you to work in the game industry instead of film?
Well, when I was in school in the 1700s, there was no game music program, right? It was just film and TV. So that's what I went out to Los Angeles for. And we're both on the East Coast right now. I'm in North Carolina. I've lived here for 20-something years now. But I was out in Los Angeles for a few years, going to school and working. And at the time, that's kind of the only opportunity, film or TV. There wasn't a lot of gaming opportunities. I moved back home to pursue kind of an indie film sort of thing, because back in the early 2000s, Wilmington, North Carolina was a huge film like metropolis. They had, I think the pinnacle was like Iron Man 3 was filmed here completely. Wilmington was what Atlanta is now. And I moved back home to sort of be with my family, but also take advantage of that. And through doing that, the irony is I kind of got known, even though I was only in LA for a couple of years, I was known as the LA film music guy by people here in North Carolina. And it's like, no, I grew up here. This is, I was only in LA for a few years. But as a result of that kind of title that a lot of people associated with me, I just found out about someone who was knowing someone who was working on a game in Australia, of all places, literally on the other side of the world. They're like, oh yeah, my friend, whoever it was, is at a video game company in Australia. They need music. You do orchestra music, right? They need orchestra music. It's like, yeah, sure. And that was a game called King Arthur that came out in 2003, I believe, so 20 years ago. It was my first like legit game. And it wasn't that I was looking for it, but compared to my experiences in Los Angeles as a very low-level nobody, doing 1,000 different versions for one commercial or scoring a lot of bad reality TV and, you know, barely getting by, lots of revisions, no original ideas. If you put a melody in there, it's too busy. It wasn't really for me, which is another reason I moved back to North Carolina. But contrast that to my experience on my first game, and I think I could easily spend 2 months on a 60-second commercial in Los Angeles, because it would just be, I mean, big commercials like the Air Force or Honda or Intel, like very, very big names, hence all the revisions. And it just turned into more work than passion. And with that first game I did, I think it was 45 minutes of music, and about the same amount of time I would do 60 seconds over and over and over and over and over again in Los Angeles. And it was really like the clouds parted and the choir sang and the rainbow came down, and I was like, this is what I want to do. Because all I really wanted to do was write music, just not the same music over and over and over. So that was when I turned my eye to games and tried to really go after specific developers and specific kinds of titles, going to conventions and playing games more. That was definitely the turning point.